Low test scores, reading levels, fighting over funding. We are on the road in Detroit debating Michigan's education crisis. Nolan and Stephen are here, and MiWeek is coming right up.
I have a question. Who wants to go first? To win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Funding for this program is provided by Delta Airlines. Keep climbing.
Hi there and welcome to MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. We are on the road in Detroit at an education summit debating the education crisis in Michigan. There are low test scores, and it's not just a problem here and there. It's a statewide problem. Go ahead and take a look at the numbers. A new report this month from Education Trust Midwest shows third-grade reading skills are not only declining, but Michigan had the largest drop among 11 comparable states in the last 3 years. In 2015, 50% of third graders were proficient in English language arts, according to the M-STEP, which is our state standardized test. The next year, 46%. In 2017, 44%. Michigan fourth graders are 43rd in the country in reading, 42nd in math, according to the National Assessment of Education Progress. Back in 2000, Michigan was above the national average in both categories. And the NAEP also shows Michigan is last when it comes to improvement in math and reading over the last 12 years. The dismal numbers continue to pile up, despite long-range studies with solutions from both the Governor's Commission and nonprofit coalitions. So we're at a critical point, and here at the Michigan Education Summit, put on by Bridge Magazine and Business Leaders for Michigan, the hard conversations are happening about changing policy, perspectives on curriculum, supporting teachers, best practices in other states, and how we fund our schools. We are at the College for Creative Studies, and let's bring in our MiWeek contributors, Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of WDET Radio. All right, guys, so we've had so many studies about the state of education in Michigan. What is it going to take some of those things off the study pages and actually put into place, Nolan?
Well, I hope that's part of the conversation here today. I hope that's the purpose here today, because there's no shortage of plans, no shortage of ideas, no shortages of models around the country, and that's what business leaders have done, it's what the Center for Michigan has done. We've got to coalesce behind a single strategy with a plan for executing it. And that's what we've missed over the last decade, two decades, while everybody else is doing that moving forward.
So we figured we finally have the buy-in that education should be the top priority in the state, or do you still feel no?
It depends on who you talk to. I mean, have you heard much of, in the nascent governor's race, people talking about specific plans for education on either side of the aisle? We've had the two past governors never really picked up the mantle of that and said, I want to get X and Y done, and I'm going to bring everyone else along, or change the structure so that it's easier to do. I don't think there's as much buy-in among the political class or among parents as there is at conferences like this.
You know, and part of it is buying into the policy. So you guys actually had a conversation with Phil Power from the Center for Michigan, Doug Rothwell from Business Leaders for Michigan, about what it's going to take to bring together a cohesive strategy.
Doug, Business Leaders out this week with its plan for improving education in Michigan. Give us the highlights.
Yeah, well, basically, we're in a crisis, Nolan. We have 1 of every 4 kids that are deemed to be college or career ready in the state, and it's a statewide problem. It's not isolated to any one district.
Or demographic group.
It's not. It's not. So we looked at what other states are doing to correct the problem. We identified 4 or 5 themes, things like having a strong accountability system, investing in teachers, making sure they can be the best they possibly can, strong standards, high assessments that are making sure that our kids are learning what they should be, and we spend the money that goes into the classroom well, as opposed to spending it on the system as a whole.
Yeah. Phil, you've been at this a long time in a number of different roles. I'm really curious to hear from you what you think we need to do to fix it. Why can't we fix this in this state?
Well, there was a guy who was the CEO and chairman of General Motors, Roger Smith. And years ago, Roger Smith said, if we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep getting what we've always got.
Yeah.
And I think the fundamental issue is we've got to change radically the context and the way we are approaching this issue. I'm very struck at Tennessee because they have made education the major issue in the state. Indeed, the first debate they have among candidates for governor is around one subject:
Schools.
Education, schools, and what do we do about
But
it?
Phil and Doug, I mean, this isn't a new worry. I mean, you mentioned Tennessee. Business leaders and the chamber have been to Tennessee. The chamber brought the Tennessee folks up here. We've known for a long time we're lagging, and yet we're still in the same place we always were. How are we going to move off that place this time? What's it going to take?
Well, I think one of our speakers today said it, which is I don't think we've been honest with our parents. I don't think we've been honest with ourselves about how bad things really are. I don't think that it's been clear that, as I mentioned earlier, only 1 out of 4 of our 11th graders are deemed to be college or career ready, that we're now below average on just about every measure you could look at in terms of educational performance. I think if people knew that, I think there would be a greater sense of urgency and a focus to act.
Yeah. Phil, poverty, of course, plays a role in the outcomes for education. You guys have done some interesting work that shows, well, ways we might mitigate that in our schools.
Well, to begin with, all of the studies that we have seen say that every kid, race, demography, income, residence, is capable of learning at a high level.
Yeah.
And as long as we keep going back into the same trap, saying, okay, because they're in Detroit, or they're from the UP, or wherever it is, we're going to keep deluding ourselves, because every kid can learn effectively.
But we know what to do. We've known what to do.
Well,
and in this latest study, you've looked at best practices. We've had ideas on the table for a long time. How do we come together in a united strategy? I mean, what's your approach going to be to bring the state, all the various interest groups, behind one plan and one mission?
Yep.
What's that going to take?
Well, we're going to do it right now. We're going to start today, Nolan, and that is that first of all, we're raising awareness around the state through conferences like this and getting reports out like we talked about. We have already brought together about 10 different organizations throughout Michigan that are aligned with the recommendations that were in our report. They want to help make this happen, and we're going to build that even larger. We hope that, for example, by the Mackinac Conference, that we can announce that even to be a bigger group of organizations. And more importantly, we're going to then also really get into raising public awareness about these problems, putting some action plans together that we can give the candidates and say, you don't have to come up with your own education plan. Here's what the state leaders believe needs to be done.
Does business have to drive it?
I think we have to be a catalyst.
Guys, thanks a lot. We appreciate your time today.
Delighted to be here. Thank you.
You know, we talk about decline in education. One thing that we can look at is third grade reading levels. I spoke with Amber Arellano from Education Trust Midwest about what strategies we have in place here in Michigan for early literacy. So Amber, Education Trust Midwest came out with a huge report, really kind of taking a look at where Michigan stands with the rest of the country. I want to focus in on third grade and the conversations that we're having around literacy. Where do we stand in terms of the rest of the country, our third graders in reading? What kind of tools do we have in place to make sure that our kids are reading at grade level by third grade?
Yeah, I mean, it's a incredibly high stakes topic right now, right? I mean, the legislature has basically put into place a third grade reading guarantee. That means that there's great urgency for schools to focus in on that, but there's also potential for third graders to be held back if they're not reading by grade level, right, by third grade.
So if we were looking at the numbers today, about how many thousand third graders are we looking at in the state of Michigan? Who
More
would
than
have to be held back?
65% of Michigan third graders could be held back if we don't really get our acts together and raise literacy levels for all of those students, yeah.
So
which
what
is
kind of systems?
tens of thousands of students, right? Yeah.
What kind of systems do we have in place right now, or what do you anticipate that we need to see here in Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a real challenge. We don't have a kind of strategic or systemic approach to it. And so really, you know, every district and sometimes even every school and even classroom teacher are kind of making it up for themselves. And that's not the way that you get to the goal of having great literacy instruction in every classroom for every student, right? So we've got to be looking at what the best states in the country are doing on this and learning from them so we can bring those best practices here to Michigan.
What states are we looking at specifically that we can mine some of the good things that they're doing?
Yeah, so Tennessee in particular is now one of the fastest improving states for all students and for early literacy. And, you know, they are doing things like ensuring that all their teachers have the most up-to-date research-based training, making sure that those teachers have better coaches, making sure that they're using data and that they're being held accountable for implementing those best practices in their classrooms. More time for students who are really behind, more time after school, time over the summer to catch up, right? And high quality teaching and learning time so that when they're, you know, if they are in a summer school, they're not just playing in the playground, they're actually learning how to read, right? I mean, all those things can really help get our students to grade level reading.
When we're looking at what's happening in Michigan right now, I don't think you can stress enough that this is not just happening in pockets. This is not just certain districts. This is not just certain cities in the state of Michigan, that across the board that we're seeing a decline. Do you feel that right now, I mean, after Education Trust Midwest has been beating the drum for years about what's been happening in Michigan, that you're seeing more of a cohesive effort from a lot of different areas, from philanthropy and from business, saying, all right, we have to start to come up with some kind of policy to ingrain a couple of things here to start to turn the needle?
Yeah, I think we're kind of at a pivot point as a state. I think we're moving from this awareness that like maybe we do have a problem, and we're kind of moving out of denial into awareness and then into, I think, urgency and action. I think more organizations are coming to the table, like Business Leaders for Michigan releasing its new report this month. Others like the Center for Michigan saying we're going to be doing convenings around the state to ensure that the new governor, whoever that person is, regardless of partisan politics, will make this issue a top priority in 2019. So I do feel like it's a hopeful moment, but we need a lot more people at the table, and we've got to really focus in on it because it's just too easy for other issues to crowd out education, right? Because kids don't have a voice in Lansing, and that's what our job is to make sure that they do.
So some of the representatives who are here today from Massachusetts and from Tennessee talked specifically about taking 2 or 3 issues, because when you say education reform, it gets overwhelming and then you don't even know where to start. But taking 2 or 3 things and saying this is what we're going to focus on, what would you say after looking at all the data and all the various things that are happening here in the state or are not happening here in the state? Where are those 2 or 3 things that we need to focus on specifically?
So one is that we've got to deal with the huge gaps that we have in school funding and teacher salaries, right? So if you're a teacher, you started your career as a teacher as I did, in a high school, and you're making $15,000 or more less for teaching in Taylor instead of West Bloomfield, that's a huge disadvantage to working class schools and poor schools, right? So we've got to deal with the equity gaps around funding. Number 2, we've got to do a better job in helping our teachers improve their practice. All of the leading states in the country have shown that when you support teachers better and you're giving them continuous coaching and ongoing feedback, amazing things can happen in a really short amount of time, right? Because that's where the interaction is for kids. It's in their classrooms all day, right? It's not Lansing, it's not policymakers, it's the people in the trenches that have to do this hard work in schools. And number 3 is being more honest with ourselves about our problem, being honest with ourselves about what those goals are, and then holding ourselves accountable for making that work happen.
How big of an issue do you think this is going to be in the governor's race this year and in electing our senators and our state reps?
Yeah, I hope it's going to be a top issue. I think it's incumbent on all of us to ensure that it is, and that we're insisting that candidates speak to education, you know, don't dodge the questions, talk about what their agenda is, talk about what they would do. You know, it's been a long time since public education was a top priority in the state, and we're not going to improve if we don't focus on it.
How about working, what kind of work can we do with universities who are training teachers, or you're getting your teaching degree from Michigan State? I mean, where do we go in terms of helping them turn out different kinds of teachers, or even encouraging people to want to go into the profession? Because I'm talking to kids right now who are graduating high school, and there's not a lot of them that want to be teachers.
Yeah, and that's partly where the salaries and the resources matter, right? Because, I mean, if you have to make a choice between going to East Grand Rapids or Wyoming, and you're going to make $15,000 or you know, less in Wyoming, and you have 2 kids and you need to save for their college, right? Of course you're gonna go for the better job. So, but I also think that the conditions that we set for schools and the kinds of supports and professional development that we give teachers and principals are so important. In Tennessee, for example, they have one of the most robust systems of feedback and coaching and support in the country. They're now one of the top improving states in the country. And rather than teachers saying, oh, we don't want all this feedback, we don't want to get better, teacher satisfaction rates have continued to go up year after year after year. So, I mean, I know for me, when I started my career, I wanted to get better, but I often felt so alone in the classroom, right? And it's a hard job, and you need a lot of support to do it well. So we've got to focus in on that.
One of the bigger debates we have when we talk about education in Michigan is governance. Who's in charge of making the big decisions? Well, Nolan spoke with Eileen Weiser. She's on the State Board of Education about the board's role in reform.
Eileen Weiser, member of the State Board of Education, you all have a goal of bringing Michigan to a top 10 education performance state within 10 years. Do you have a strategy to go with that goal?
Yes, Nolan. There's very deep work that needs to be done since the state does not have a statewide curriculum. It's being done on something called multi-tiered systems of support, which is an effort to identify learning problems with children very early on and to correct them before it becomes an issue that keeps them from learning. So this is extremely important for third grade reading and math, because if a child has a hearing, a visual, or some sort of a learning disability, and you find that early on in their lives, then they'll be able to move along with their class at the right pace, and money that's been spent on children later on in remediation can be spent early, and they will be working well.
Pushing the needle in Michigan has been sort of a frustrating process. We know we put $80 million into early reading programs that don't seem to be producing results yet. Why is it so hard here to make progress on education achievement?
Well, there are several issues. One is governance, because we don't have a linear structure that allows for accountability within the department and the State Board of Ed. It doesn't quite work that way well. But the second one is that without a statewide curriculum, without something to drive those discussions, it gets very hard to work with schools and teachers on evidence-based practices that are working in other states.
So is that where the governor's Marshall Plan comes in?
That's one of the places.
Career
Absolutely.
training?
It's actually not career vocational training. It's an effort to infuse high school curricula with the sciences and math and anything else that works to bring children into a creative, critical thinking, problem-solving mode. So the goal on this is a competitive grant program that would align communities, businesses, the K-12 system, and post-secondary to come up with a new way of teaching K-12 subjects. And we have high school students right now in the UP who are learning Algebra 2 by building Habitat for Humanity houses.
So Business Leaders of Michigan put their education plan out this week, and one of the things they mentioned was consistency in measuring performance. And I know that we went to the M-STEP test to measure student performance, student achievement a few years ago, and now there's some conversation about moving to another test. Where do you stand on that?
So M-STEP, what we really want is for every child to be a lifelong learner. We want them to be able to do problem solving and critical thinking. And right now, Michigan's schools don't necessarily teach that. But the capstone of 8th grade was supposed to be a writing assessment that moved from different subjects that could show whether children could write, which they really struggle with right now, and also show if they could problem solve. We don't know if that test is going to happen. I personally think we should move to PISA, which is a problem-solving test for 15-year-olds.
Eileen Weiser, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
You know, Nolan and Stephen agree on some things, other things they agree to disagree on, and one of them is when it comes to funding our schools. They're at odds with how much we should be paying for our K-12 education and where that funding should be going. So we decided to let them talk it out a little bit.
So Nolan, Business Leaders for Michigan has this new report out, and everybody's pretty excited about some of the ideas in there.
Good ideas.
It doesn't talk a lot about money, which I think is still the driver in the conversation, or needs to be.
See, it doesn't talk about money for a reason, I think. We don't know yet how much money we're going to need to properly educate our children, because we've got all of these structural issues we've got to deal with first. And there's no point pouring more money onto a bad system. This system isn't working for a lot of reasons other than money.
Well, that may be true, but if you look at other states, and I always say we're really bad at this around here. We're really bad at saying, hey, that state figured this out. Why don't we just do what they did? Maryland, Massachusetts, they started the conversation, at least in part, with the idea that you needed more money to get better results, or you need to divvy up the money a little differently, right? Massachusetts sends more dollars to poor districts than it does to wealthy districts. Why can't we do that?
I'm not saying we don't need more money. I don't know if we do or not. I know we're the 9th we spend 9th most in the country,
a lot of money,
and we
as it
get
is.
the 9th worst results. So I don't think the connection's that direct. But when you look at things like the Business Leaders Report said we got to support our teachers more, I agree with that. And I think we should have merit pay for teachers. I think the best teachers in this state should be making six-figure salaries. But the teachers themselves got to buy into that system. They can't insist on being treated at one level as professionals and another level as factory workers who put widgets on the axles, and everybody gets paid the same. The work's all the same.
Well, I think they're
They should
concerned.
value great teachers.
Yeah, well, I think their concern is about what's the floor, right? Somebody shouldn't be making $30,000, $40,000 a year teaching kids how to read and write.
I think they just don't trust a merit system, and you've got to bring them around to that.
So I think the skepticism about these arguments comes from the idea that if you ask me, if you ask anybody you know of means, what do you do? What are the choices that you make about schools? Money is one of the driving considerations. If you live in a district where you send your kids to the public schools, you're sending them probably to a very high spend district. If you send your kids to private school, the way I do, you're spending a lot of money. Why shouldn't that be the same for everybody?
But the problem with focusing on money is then that becomes the whole conversation, and we don't think about how we're spending money. We're doing a lot of things wrong in this state. We stifle innovation. There's not a whole lot of innovative education going on.
Not a lot of accountability.
There's not a lot of accountability. We've got to address the societal and cultural issues. I don't think schools have changed all that much. I don't think teachers are all that much worse. I don't think kids have changed any. Other things are going on that affect education, going on in the homes, going on outside the classroom. That requires us to make adjustments over here that we haven't made.
Yeah.
And how we teach children who come from challenged homes, who are overly stimulated by electronics. We're doing things the same way we've always done them. We need to break out of that mold.
So the question always in Michigan is, who's the person who does that, right?
Well, that's the problem.
We haven't had a governor who could muster the political will or power to say, I'm taking this issue, running with the ball. The structure doesn't help, but
structure works
leadership
against it because you've got an elected school board and a school superintendent over here. Over here, you've got the governor and the legislature, and they don't interact very well. I think you could make a better case for putting more resources to schools if people believed we would use them effectively and efficiently. And I think that starts with streamlining the governance structure.
Maybe.
Okay, you're both wrong. I've always wanted to say that. No. Who said you could moderate yourselves? Yeah, I think it's really interesting that we're finally having the larger education conversation, but I do agree with saying you have to find 2 or 3 things that we can possibly all agree on instead of starting very far out. But I do believe that we need to have a little bit more transparency about what we're spending on, that maybe we've got to figure out where to allocate our resources in a different way.
But if you look at the states that are ahead of us, they are all spending much better and more. They're spending more, but they're spending smarter.
That with a good plan, a good strategy
they didn't just throw
that
money.
everybody agreed on.
A good plan, and also making sure that you've got the backup of people in the state, parents in the state that are demanding more for their kids.
And what I worry about, I guess, is the pushback, the inevitable pushback against the idea of turning the formula on its head, sending more money to districts that need more money because their kids are poor. I think that's the third rail that no one wants to play.
How much more money they need until we start, getting a good strategy in place and a good spending plan.
Well, let's see that. Let's hope that there's going to be a deeper dive here, and that our elected officials are going to take notice of this. Stephen Henderson, Nolan Finley, I'm glad I could walk in on that debate.
Welcome anytime.
Didn't walk into blows.
Exactly, I didn't. That's going to do it for MiWeek. For all of the Education Summit, you can just go to our website, miweek.org. You will find it all there. We will see you next week. Take care.